Okay, so here's where we move from the terrible tier to the bad tier. Basically, the difference between these two is while both are filled with bad fights, terrible fights are actively annoying and unfun to do. Meanwhile, the bad fights are usually just fights that are for the most part boring, but are still somewhat annoying to do. Though with most of these fights being boring, I wouldn't really have that much to say about them, so most of the entries in this tier are going to be very short. With that out of the way, let's move on to the worst of the bad fights. To sum up the Skeleton Lords, it's basically just an ad fight. All you do is kill random mobs, with some variation, in that the fight slightly changes depending on what order you kill the Skeleton Lords in, but all the changes is what and how much trash you kill in what order. The reason why I placed it where it is because I can't really say it's quite terrible as it's far too easy to be annoying, but you can barely even call it a boss fight. Don't really have much else to say about them, so let's just move on. Well, so you might start to notice a bit of a pattern with the next few entries. Royal Rat Vanguard, much like the Skeleton Lords, is just a glorified ad battle. All you do is kill a bunch of rats until it finally decides to spawn in the big boss rat. The actual boss rat is barely any different from the other rats when it comes to appearance, and honestly the same when it comes to how hard it is to kill. Most people by the time they get to this boss can very easily one-shot the boss rat in one combo, making this fight a joke. Only reason I place it higher than Skeleton Lords is that there's actually a boss enemy this time. And I guess if you were to be very unlucky, you could get cornered and might even somehow manage to die. Finally we get a break from Dark Souls 2's ads fight, though by going by its placement, the fight obviously isn't much better. As opposed to the Vanguard version, this time it's mostly against one enemy. Technically the fight comes with some ads as well, but they're pretty easy to deal with at the start of the fight. After you're dealt with the ads, all this fight boils down to is a very oversized rat that has a total of 3 moves that really loves to either jump really far away so you have to constantly run around, or stand right on top of you so you can't see anything at all. If you were to do this fight at a higher New Game Plus, I could honestly easily see this fight ending up in the terrible tier. But seeing how I haven't done that, it ends up here at the bottom of the bad tier. This is honestly a fight that most of you are probably expecting in the terrible tier, and I do agree that this fight is terrible, but for the sake of this video and the criteria I gave earlier, can't really place it much lower. While the fight is terrible and is just killing ads, it's also an extremely easy fight. All you do is run around and kill a bunch of low HP enemies while using the debris around the room to block the magic being thrown at you. If the casters were stronger and actually had the possibility of killing you, I probably would rank it lower, but it's basically impossible to die in this fight, which is why I can't really rank it any lower. It's not a frustrating fight, but it sure is a bad one. Keeping to the trend of Dark Souls 2 ad fights, we have this gem from the first DLC. I don't really have much to say about this fight. All it is just a fight against 3 NPC enemies who are for some reason dressed in clothing from past NPCs in the Soul series. There isn't really anything special to the fight. Another really easy ad fight where all you do is just spam R1 to stun like the enemy and kill them all in a combo or two. Main reason this ends up above any of the fights below is that you at least fight somewhat unique enemies, as the people you fight are in recognizable armor. But honestly, all of the fights so far in the bad tier are as bad as each other and the placements are somewhat arbitrary. Okay, to start off, I need to give Wolnir some props. The intro and the start of the fight are honestly pretty good. The cutscene where you get transported to his arena and the actual reveal of Wolnir himself are both done pretty damn well. But that is also where my praise of the fight ends. The actual fight is honestly straight up terrible. All you do is hug his arm and beat the shit out of him until his bracelets break. That's it. You barely need to actively try to dodge his attacks. All you really need to do is pay attention to when he decides to move up. Though my number one complaint with this fight is that despite the fight being extremely easy, it's also not that hard to die in it. See, Wolnir really likes to do large sweeping attacks, something that for the most part don't actually matter, but sometimes he'll roll to dodge the attack, only for them to get stuck in his arm and get dragged under his main body, which is pretty much a guaranteed death. I used to think this was somewhat of a rare thing to happen, but as I was replaying Dark Souls 3 as preparation for this video, I ended up dying several times in a row. It is honestly a shame that the actual fight part of Wolnir is so bad when everything else is done so well. Guardian Drake is another fight where I don't really have much to say. There isn't really anything to this fight. All that happens is that the dragon flies around, breathe fires in a specific spot in the arena, comes down, you hit it a few times and then it flies away again. Rinse repeat until the boss is dead. You'll spend more time waiting as the dragon flies around you than you will actually do fighting it. I think Dark Souls 2 could have easily done without this one. This one pains me a bit to put so low, as I really like Ceaseless Discharge. From its design to his lore to the way you start the fight, everything outside of the actual fight part is really well done. But this is a boss fight tier list after all, and the fighting part of Ceaseless is extremely underwhelming. Basically, what FromSoft intends for you to do is trigger the fight and then run all the way to the start of the boss arena again, where Ceaseless will jump for you and hang off the edge. All you need to do from here is hit his arm a couple times and then the fight is over. Sounds simple, right? Well, as a new player there is no way for you to know this. There are no other fights like this in Dark Souls 1, or in the rest of the series for that matter. There isn't really any indication that you're meant to run back to the start, and even if you manage to luck out and do what FromSoft intends for you to do, there is still a pretty big chance that Ceaseless will just spam range attacks instead of jumping, like he's actually meant to. As a whole, this fight is unintuitive and buggy. Such a shame for what is otherwise a really cool boss. And we're back to Dark Souls 2, and god I wish we weren't. Not going to lie, there isn't really much to say about the old Iron King. This entire fight is just this dude slamming his hands down and you hitting them. He has like 3 moves he'll do, all being extremely easy to dodge. He might have been kind of annoying to fight if it weren't for the fact that once he slams his hands down, they stand down for a comically long amount of time. It's not like his hands get stuck in anything or something like that. No, he just lets them sit there for no reason. It's actually beyond me why FromSoft decided to make one of the Lord Souls one of the blandest and easiest fights in the entire game. Quite literally, the hardest part about this fight is trying to not fall into the tiny hole that is in this arena. Honestly, this fight had some potential. It's obviously based on the Gargoyles fight from Dark Souls 1, which is honestly a fight I do enjoy quite a bit, as you'll see from its placement later in the video. But potential is about all it has, as the fight is actually pretty awful. Individually the Gargoyles have very boring movesets, where they only have a couple of moves they will use, so fighting them alone is boring. But that's where you're in luck, as there is a million of them in the fight. While I was fighting them again for this video, I ended up fighting 4 of them at once, which was mostly a result of the boss layering attacks in such a way where I couldn't kill them fast enough. So most of the fight was just spent running around, getting in a few attacks where I could until I whittled them down. I don't understand how they had the basis for a good fight. 2 Gargoyles that have basic moveset, where one is mainly ranged and one is mainly melee, which makes for an interesting fight, and then managed to make it this much of a shitfest. There's nothing in this fight, all they did was make them all melee, give them less moves, and make more of them. It's like they thought adding more of an enemy is a reasonable way of making a fight harder. Such a waste. Also, the runback is a massive pain. Now this is a fight that dropped quite a bit after replaying Dark Souls 1 again for this video. I used to think it was a mediocre fight with not a lot going on with it, but man did I have some rose-tinted glasses. Centipede Demon is honestly one of the most annoying fights in Dark Souls 1. You will spend most of your time under the boss, where you can't really see what's going on, just swinging wildly, with the boss occasionally jumping straight up, leaving you guessing for the first couple of times when he's actually going to land. The arena the boss is in doesn't really add anything except for frustration, as the only time it really comes into play is when the boss manages to knock you into the lava and does a million more damage than the initial hit did. You might counter this by saying just cut off his tail and get the ring early, but there isn't really any indication that this is something you can do. Sure, there have been several bosses so far that have had mechanics where you could cut off the tail, but never has it given you something that directly interacted with the fight, and it's not even clear that this thing has a tail. The only saving grace for this fight is that the boss itself is very squishy by the time you get here, and you will most likely kill it in a few combos, making the annoying parts kind of obsolete. I feel like most of you watching this probably expected Moonlight Butterfly to be further down the list, and that is honestly fair. There isn't really anything particularly interesting about the fight, as you will spend most of it just waiting for it to come close so you can actually hit it. The reason why I rate Moonlight Butterfly higher than a fight like Guardian Drake, which is pretty much the same type of fight, is that Moonlight Butterfly at least makes you actively dodge things while you wait. For most of Guardian Drake, you are just stood still waiting or you're running in a straight line, but with the Moonlight Butterfly you need to actually dodge roll into its attack, even if they are really easy to dodge. I don't by any means think it's a good fight, but as far as this type of fight goes, it's not the worst. And to end off our little streak of Dark Souls 1 bosses, we have Stray Demon. I find the placement of this boss to be kind of unfortunate, as it's just the Asylum Demon reused with one new move. I would much rather properly explain the boss when I get to Asylum Demon, so I'll just do that. Rather, in this segment, I'll explain why I think it's a worse fight despite only adding to the original fight. First off, the way you start the fight is fairly cheap. There isn't really any realistic way of knowing that the floor can cave in like it does. Even if you bait the enemies around it to run over it, it won't do anything. I find it to be a cheap gotcha, and on top of that, there is no way of avoiding the full damage even when you know about the drop. Next up, you have the part where if you don't clear the trash before you start the fight, there's a decent chance that they'll fall into the hole with you, making the fight more annoying than it was intended to be. I would prefer if they just added an invisible wall around it so that the mobs can't run over it. This would also solve the problem of them running across it without triggering the drop. Lastly, the added mechanic to the boss aren't even good. All they added to it was one attack where the demon does a big AoE in front of it. The reason why I think this is a bit of a shit attack is that the animation for this attack is not very well defined, making it fairly hard to even figure out where the attack ends. So yeah, I think this was a completely unnecessary reuse of a boss, especially considering that they will later reuse the boss for a third time anyways. Next up you have the 6th ad fight of the bad tier, Deacons of the Deep, and just like all the other ad fights, it's a bit shit. Pretty much the whole gimmick for this fight is that you want to attack the enemy that is glowing. Do this enough and the actual boss will spawn. From here on, the rest of the fight is honestly just R1 spamming the boss, trying to also hit the fat dudes next to him at the same time so they can't use miracles to push you away. This is another fight that is honestly pretty impossible to actually die to, as both the ads and the boss are very squishy and barely do any damage. The only real way to die is to overestimate the boss and playing it too safe, which will most likely end with them getting their big cast off killing you. But you really only need to die once to understand how you're meant to fight the boss. In a way, Deacons of the Deep is just Royal Rat Vanguard done better, with better visuals and more mechanics. It doesn't really save it from being based on a bad concept to begin with though. Man, I'm honestly not even sure why this boss is this far up. It's honestly a stretch to call this even a boss. There are world bosses in Elden Ring that have more complex mechanics that I didn't even include in this video. This fight is basically just a glorified damage sponge, as all you do is just stand in front of one of his back legs and spam R1. He'll occasionally fly off and do some fire stuff, it doesn't really matter, just get back to his back leg and go off. Now see, this is all bad enough, but by far the worst part of this fight is the run back. Holy fuck, I have never been more tilted in my life than when I somehow managed to die and had to run back to the boss. There are actually a million dudes just stood in front of the boss room, and because of the way fog walls work in Dark Souls 2, you can't even just run past them and go into the boss, as the enemies will just hit you out of the animation. I easily spent way longer trying to get back into the fight than I actually did to fight the boss. Vendrick is another fight where there isn't really all that much to say about him. He's just some tall lanky dude walking around in a room. He has like 2 moves that he can do, both really plain swings of his swords. He does have an interesting mechanic where you need the giant souls to be able to do more damage to him, but this isn't really communicated very well or at all to you unless you get told by someone else or just give up and look it up. Getting all of the giant souls is a massive pain in the ass, so you'll most likely do it while missing a few, making him pretty tanky. This wouldn't be that much of an issue if it weren't for the fact that Vendrick does surprisingly high damage and can chain hit you if you're unlucky, effectively 100 desiriing you without counterplay. Obviously it's your fault for getting hit, but the fight is so boring that there's a decent chance that you'll slip up and just not really be paying attention. It's a bit of a shame though, as Vendrick is a pretty cool character and I would have really liked to have a proper showdown against him when he was in his prime. But instead we get this joke of a fight. Micolash is another one of those fights where I really like everything about the fight, except for the fight itself. The setup, the boss, the way he speaks during the fight, the music, everything is done really well, and then you actually do the fight and it just sucks. The entire fight pretty much boils down to chasing some random crazy dude and having to do a quote-unquote puzzle where you lead him into a room where he'll finally stay. From here, the rest of the fight is just beating up some NPC with 3 moves that he can do, none of which are particularly hard to dodge. Like most NPC fights, he's very easy to just play super aggro against and just stunlock him with spamming R1. Somehow the part where you chase him around is harder than the fight itself. I placed it this high purely for the aspects of the fight that I listed before, but it still ends up being in the bad tier as nothing can save a fight this bad. I think this might be the most disappointing fight in all of Dark Souls 2. The Souls series usually has a tendency to end strong with a good final fight. Before you comment about how Nashandra isn't the actual final fight of the game, just give me a minute, we'll get to Aldia in a second, probably sooner than you're expecting. Now onto why I find this fight to be so disappointing, and to be honest, the fight is just a massive letdown. There isn't really all that much build up for this fight. You do get to meet Nashandra once while in the castle, but it doesn't really do much to build her own fight up, and is mainly there to give you more backstory on the kingdom and Vendrick. That being said, I do think her design is cool, and the way the Emerald Herald warns you that she is coming for you is also pretty cool, but it just isn't enough. And then we get to the fight itself, and oh boy does it only get worse from here. Nashandra is honestly one of the most boring fights in the entire game. She barely has any moves, and the ones she does have are just straight up boring. For the most part, she'll just be swinging her scythe at you while occasionally doing a laser attack that's very easy to dodge. She does have the mechanic where she'll summon humanity looking things around her that curse you, but they honestly don't really do anything, and you can for the most part just ignore them and rush Nashandra down. She's fairly squishy and doesn't really do that much damage. I don't know what it is with Dark Souls 2 and just having really boring movesets, but this is what the result is. A lot of really bland fights. It's just such a shame that it affected the last boss as well. Okay, so I feel like Halflight is a hard one to judge, since the fight is going to be very different each time you fight it. Or, well, that's assuming you fought it back at the release of the Ring City DLC. Because of the fact that at the time of writing this, the servers for Dark Souls 3 have been down for several months, I'm going to rate it on the quality of the NPC version of the fight, and not the Invasion version. You might disagree with this, but you honestly would also disagree with my placement of the Invasion version regardless, so this is probably the lesser of two evils for you. Okay, now onto the fight itself. It kinda sucks. This is mainly a problem that all Dark Souls games have had. Fights against NPCs are just kinda bad. It's far too easy to just walk up to them and R1 spam to stun lock them. Halflight kinda saves this by having a decent amount of range attacks to keep you away, but this only works for a little while until you figure out his movesets. He does also have adds that spawn in during the fight, but they are very easy to kill without Halflight being able to do anything about it. Overall, it's just a really disappointing fight and barely even counts as that in its current state. It's kind of a neat idea, but it isn't really done any better than it was done in Demon's Souls, which came out almost a decade before it. Seath is another one of those unfortunate fights where I think everything about it is great, except for the fight itself. I looked into deeper, I found Seath to be one of the most interesting characters in Dark Souls 1. There's a lot of great lore and unique design. Even the opening cutscene does a great job of building him up. But then comes his actual fight. Seath, like most of the other big bosses in this series, suffer a lot from their size. I find bigger bosses to be annoying to fight, as you usually will struggle to actually see what is happening, and tend to just spam attacks and face tank whatever attack they send at you. This also applies to Seath. I think all in all, Seath has about 4 or 5 moves that he'll rotate through, most of which won't even hit you as long as you just hug his side or behind him. The mechanic where you destroyed the little needle to make him vulnerable is okay, but honestly this doesn't make much sense in lore, because there's no way he would leave the only thing making him immortal just chilling around with no defenses. And yeah, I know there are a bunch of golems and stuff outside, but that's still light defenses for how important it is to him. So yeah, I find Seath to be extremely disappointing, made even worse by the fact that there is a much better dragon fight later on in the game, but we'll get to that in a couple of tiers. This might honestly also be a bit of a controversial one, as I feel there's a lot of people that enjoyed Dark Souls 2 also enjoyed this fight, but hopefully you'll see where I'm coming from by the end of this. I'll start off with the fact that it's going to become blatantly obvious by the end of this video. I'm not a big fan of duo fights. That's not to say that I don't like any duo fights, as there is one extremely high on my list, but for the most part I just don't think they're particularly well done. The main fault I find with this duo fight is that I don't think the two bosses play off each other particularly well. It just feels like you are fighting two individual bosses put together. Some of you might disagree with this and think that they made one slow and one fast, and I somewhat agree that it feels like they tried to do that, but in reality I just don't think it worked. For most of the fight they will both be coming at you at the same time, constantly laying their attacks in such a way where you rarely get attacks in, making the fight still doable but extremely tedious. Even when one of them backs off, leaving one in melee, it can be hard to get hits in as the one in the back will just throw magic at you instead. Another problem I have with this fight that some of you might actually like is the revive mechanic. If you don't know, then basically in this fight, if you kill one of them and enough time passes, it will revive, make it so you have to kill both of them fairly close to each other. I don't even think this is a bad mechanic to add to a fight, I just don't think it works that well for this particular fight. So yeah, that's basically what I like about the fight. The actual boss and their movesets are fine, and I don't have a problem with them, it's just that when you put them together I start hating it. I'm not even ashamed to admit that this is the only boss that I summoned for in any of the Dark Souls games. Now on to the other contender for most disappointing fight in Dark Souls 2, which is coincidentally the other final boss of the game. I don't know what it is about Dark Souls 2, but they just couldn't for the life of them make a decent final boss. Now, I like Aldia. He has cool lore, decent design, and a good build-up where you meet him several times throughout the game, all culminating in a very lackluster fight. To really highlight just how boring this fight is, I can sum it up in one sentence. Attack while fire is off, do basically nothing while the fire is on. That's the entire fight, and my god is it boring. I think I just really hate fights where there is a lot of downtime where I can't do anything. I much prefer fights where I'm actively fighting the boss and having to constantly be either dodging or weaving in attacks. But Aldia is the complete opposite of that, as you spend most of the fight just standing there waiting for him to do his big attack so the flames will go out. It's honestly just tedious. That being said, he was still somehow less disappointing than Nashandra, so I guess there's something positive about it. Okay, so remember a few minutes ago when I said Throne Defender was the only fight I summoned for? Yeah, I might have lied. I was to summon for this fight, but come on, nobody likes this fight, right? You all did the same, right? So I don't really have that much to say about this fight either, as most of it was said during the Throne Defender segment. It's another duo fight where it just feels like two enemies were just put together, but not all that much thought put into how well they play off of each other. Just like Throne Defender, you can't even just rush down one of the bosses fast to make it a 1v1, as the one left will just res the one that died. At least there's a saving grace where they share health, so you don't actually need to kill both at the same time this time. The only reason I put this fight higher on the list is because, at the very least, this fight was in Elden Ring, so there's a million different ways where you can just cheese the fight and make it really easy, and thank God for that. Old Demon King honestly might be the fight that dropped the most ratings after I replayed the games for this video. I used to think he was just this 5 out of 10 mediocre fight with not much to him, but after fighting him again, I might genuinely hate him. Bit of a disclaimer in this one, a lot of the reason I don't like this fight comes from only playing melee, and I think this is one of the bosses in the series that punishes melee the most. Most of his attacks punish you for being melee, and don't really affect you if you're ranged, so let's get through a few of them. The attack where he taps the ground a couple of times and spawns a flame circle can be ranged if you are ranged, but not as a melee. The hitbox also feels really arbitrary, making it annoying to dodge. Most of his melee attacks are crazy fast compared to anything else at this point in the game, and are genuinely hard to react to even if you are a veteran. His fire breathing move is really annoying, as all he does is just breathe fire under him. It's really easy to dodge, but you can't damage him as he does this, so you just have to run around and wait. To add to that, his favorite move, the one where he shoots meteors at you, pretty much does the exact same thing. You are forced to pull off the boss and hide behind the debris in the arena, making it so you can't attack him as a melee. And to top it all off, there's this weird bug when you fight him as a melee where your lock-on will just randomly drop. This isn't even a rare occurrence, as it happened several times when I fought him again for this video. Though it's not like it's all bad. This mechanic where he starts burning and becomes stronger for a while only to burn out and become weak is a pretty good mechanic, and I think it's a bit wasted on this boss. I think if they refined this mechanic they could bring it back and make a very good fight out of it. But as it stands, the old Demon King is just really tedious to fight with not a lot of good aspects, at least for melee players. I think the Demon of Hatred is a bit of an unfortunate, as it is an amalgamation of a lot of things I don't like in the Souls bosses. First off, he's big, really big. This isn't really much of a problem at the start, but as the fight goes on and he gets more and more moves, it becomes harder and harder to really tell what he is doing if you're playing the game aggressively, something Sekiro actively encourages you to do. Secondly, Demon of Hatred takes in use a mechanic that isn't really used in any other point of the game, that being that we can jump over him to dodge his charge. I don't think this is particularly well explained or shown to the player in order for you to know that this is even possible, and without knowing this, the fight is pretty much impossible. I know it's a pretty obvious opinion about this boss, but I genuinely think that this would fit more in Bloodborne, and it makes me think that it was a scrap Bloodborne boss that was reused for Sekiro. But yeah, not much else to say about him honestly, just a bad fit for a game where I think almost all the other bosses are great. Now, I think this will easily be my most controversial opinion on this entire list, so let me try and at least somewhat explain where I'm coming from. To start off, let's point out the most obvious thing about the fight that immediately makes it lose some points for me. He's a dragon, he's massive, he's unreasonably tanky, so his fight takes ages, and despite this, he has several ways of one-shotting the player. And as a minor note, his runback is also a pain. So let's get a bit more in-depth about these points, starting with his size. At least for Midir, most of my problems about his size don't actually come from not being able to see what he is doing this time, but centers around how you pretty much have to hit his head. So if you didn't know, Midir has a mechanic where he takes heavily reduced damage if you hit anything that is in his head, more or less forcing you to hit his head. This on his own isn't that bad, but when combined with the fact that he is massive and really likes to move his head a lot, there simply just aren't all that many chances for you to go for hits. This is made infinitely more more frustrating when you combine that with just how insanely tanky he is to begin with, making this fight way too long. Another complaint I have that ties to his HP is how little you get to hit him. Not only referring to how little time his head will spend down, but also just how little time you get to spend close to him in general. He has 2 different moves that he will use that just breathes fire on top of himself, so you need to run away. Combo this with his charge attack, and with the right RNG, there will be times where you have no opening to attack for almost an entire minute. This would be annoying on any boss, but it's just that much more frustrating when combined with his ludicrous health pool. I could go on, but I don't want this segment to go on as long as your average Midir fight, so I'll end it here. Midir is a fight that I really do want to enjoy, as he is really hard, but this just feels like one of those fights that is hard to be hard, so he ends up just being frustrating instead. Well, there you have it, the entire bad tier. I'll put it up on screen so you can see it in its entirety. Though to be honest, when it comes to the ordering, it's a bit arbitrary on some of them. My opinion on certain fights kind of fluctuate day to day, so I just had to lock it in at some point. So some of the fights could probably go up or down a few spots, but with the amount of bosses in this list, it's just kinda how it is. Another thing is, with the amount of fights, this tier ended up taking a lot longer to make than I thought it would. So each entry ended up being fairly short and the editing is limited. Up next I'm doing the lackluster tier, and it is equally long, so it will most likely be in the same style as this one. So if there's anything about this video you didn't like, then let me know in the comments and I'll see if I can fix it for the next one. Also, as you probably noticed, some of the footage wasn't mine. Not having a PlayStation available to me makes getting recordings of the fight somewhat hard to do. Also, being somewhat new to this whole video making thing, I messed up some of the recordings, so I had to resort to using all this footage. So I wanted to thank Boss Fight Database for the footage, and have left links in the description for each fight that I used. I was also pleasantly surprised by the amount of attention and comments on the last video. I responded to most of them and read all of them. I changed the setup and tried to implement as many of the suggestions as possible, but the video is still far from perfect, so don't be afraid to let me know in the comments what you think could be better in the next one. I also love reading all of your opinions on both my placements and your opinions of the bosses in the list, so I hope to see a bunch of that as well. But that'll be it for the bad tier. Thank you for watching, and bye.